Welcome back. You're watching NewsX and I'm Vaishali Kohli. Now, the United States has said that it stands by the brave people of Iran, with President Donald Trump making it clear that all options remain on the table to stop what Washington describes as a slaughter of protesters. U.S. Ambassador to the UN, Mike Waltz, told the UN Security Council that Trump is a man of action and warned against what he called endless talk. As the meeting was convened at the request of the US, Waltz dismissed Iran's claims that the protests are a foreign plot, saying the regime is weaker than ever and fearful of its own people. He said Trump had adopted a wait-and-see approach after being told the killings were easing and that there was no current plan for large-scale executions. Iran's deputy UN ambassador, Gholamhossein Darzi, rejected the US accusations, saying Iran does not seek escalation or confrontation, and warning that any act of aggression would be met with a decisive and proportionate response. I have Shruti Dasgupta, International Affairs expert, joining me. Shruti, what do you feel about this?
I'm sorry, I missed the question. Could you please repeat it?
Yes, Shruti. We're just talking about the fact that now the United States has said that it stands by the people of Iran, with President Donald Trump making it clear that all options remain on the table to stop what Washington describes as the slaughter of protesters. How do you feel about that?
Well, the United Nations has no choice but to stand with Iran. But what can they actually do physically to ensure that US does not take extreme action militarily in the politics of another nation is something which is very limited. There can be a lot of options by the UN Security Council, but all of them can be struck down by the veto power held by USA. There is an emergency resolution power which was used during the Suez crisis that can overrule over this kind of veto powers that are exercised by nations, but that requires two-thirds majority. So United Nations assurance against US action is more like a soft cushion, more of a diplomatic optics, rather than an actual hand of support. US says all actions are available to it. It basically means that it may not intercede depending on what the conditions are, whether they feel they can win this battle or not, because unfortunately, Trump regime strives to showcase itself as a very powerful military and political power. If they end up deploying forces but not actually winning a war with a fine-tooth comb, and until a moment arises where his intervention would actually execute a change in Iran, he would not physically at least interfere in the politics of Iran. Iran, though, has raised up the concerns. They have Irfan Sultani and the others on the execution block, but just not right now. For Wednesday, I believe his execution is scheduled. So it's not as if they have stopped executions. They're just making it more staggered and making it look as if it is allowed, even though the charges against these protesters does not allow for executions. So the politics of Iran is more about suppressing the dissent and blaming external powers for inciting, empowering, and maybe even paying protesters to come out on the streets, because the economic crisis of Iran is a definite problem which actually began these protests, which have escalated into a call for a regime change and asking for the I believe that one of the taglines is that the mullah must leave. That is the dissolution of the mullah regime that actually came forth to power in 1979.
All right. Shruti, of course, the ambassador Waltz has warned against endless talk. Now, does this indicate any kind of impatience with diplomacy and a tilt towards coercive action?
As I've laid out before you, he can find that the endless talks around it does not really lead to any actual action on ground. They cannot deploy a UN Security Council force there. As I said before, They have an emergency resolution power, but it has to be raised to the General Assembly, and two-thirds of the nations have to vote for it. So there is going to be an extended, long procedure behind any kind of UN action. So him saying that he doesn't want really too much diplomatic conversations about it just ensures that please don't bring resolutions that I have no power to do anything about. Right now, what I find, unfortunately, in the case of Venezuela, even for U.S. tariffs or Iran, no matter what is the internal politics of the nation, the use of USA and its aggressive stances is something that UN is helpless and toothless against. And they have no option but to look at the other powers which hold veto, and for which, like your UK and France are, of course, supporters of USA. They don't really want to use too many harsh powers. And Russia is the world enemy number one right now due to Ukraine wars. And China is not a trustworthy power. So they have no options on the table as far as USA and its aggressive stance towards any diplomacy is concerned. So despite the fact that the UN General Secretary is saying, let's not have too much diplomatic conversation, let's put it on the table and say, okay, you'll not interfere, it doesn't really ensure that any nation is forced to follow the path that UN is pointing to.
All right, Shruti, thank you for joining me on the broadcast. Now, Russia has accused the United